If this brings you peace, consider subscribing. It helps me keep making these stories for you. Take a deep breath, dim your lights, let the hum of the day fade out, settle into the quiet. Tonight, we're going to ancient Rome, but not the Rome of marble generals or clashing swords. We're walking softly into the small, hidden world of girls, where every dawn began the same way, with a whisper, a stretch, and the smell of baking bread from the communal ovens. Imagine you are one of them. Maybe your name is Livia, or Tully, or simply Little One, because not everyone had the luxury of a name that lasted beyond their street. The air before sunrise is still cool, the kind that smells faintly of clay and damp laundry. You sleep on a straw-stuffed mattress beside your sister, wrapped in a coarse linen sheet, and you can hear the cooing of pigeons in the rafters. Outside, footsteps echo on the cobbles, an early baker delivering loaves, his cartwheels clattering like distant thunder. You open your eyes, but there's no rush. The house around you, a narrow insular apartment, creaks as the city begins to breathe. Somewhere below, a mother hums softly to a baby. From across the alley comes the rhythmic sound of a woman pounding grain with a pestle. Every girl knows that rhythm. It's the pulse of Rome's mornings. You stand, brush the bits of straw from your hair, and step to the window. The air smells of ash, olive oil, and river mist. It's an ordinary day, but every day was a balancing act under Rome's girl rules, rules that told you where to walk, what to wear, when to speak, even how to laugh. And though those rules changed with your class, your neighborhood, and your fortune, they all shared one thing. They never asked what you wanted. Still, girls made their worlds within them. They found small joys in secret corners, a good fig from the market, a friend who would swap ribbons, a story whispered by lamplight. So tonight, as we drift back through time, we'll follow them. The baker's daughter with flour on her cheek, the scribe's niece with ink on her fingers, the young wife with calluses hidden beneath her rings. We'll see how they lived, learned, laughed, and sometimes broke the rules without anyone noticing. Imagine the soft flicker of a clay lamp on the wall. A rooster called somewhere near the Tiber. The stones are still wet from last night's drizzle, and the city smells of smoke and time. In the atrium of a wealthier home, a girl rises too, her feet sinking into polished marble instead of dirt. She's Lucia, maybe 12 years old, and her world feels both enormous and small. She knows her mother will inspect her tunic seams, and that the household slaves will braid her hair just so. She also knows she'll spend her morning learning how to keep a home that isn't hers yet, how to stretch wool without fraying it, how to press olives into oil, how to write her name neatly in wax. She doesn't know yet that her name might one day be written on a marriage contract instead. But for now, she's just a girl under Rome's sky, blinking at the first stripe of light on the horizon. The baker's daughter, the senator's niece, the freedwoman's child, they all wake within the same city heartbeat. You can hear the layered hum of it, vendors calling, shutters opening, the distant splash of water poured into bronze basins. Rome wasn't quiet, even at dawn, but there was a strange calm inside the noise. Not as Livia pulls on her simple tunic, rough unbleached linen that scratches slightly at the shoulder seams. She ties it with a cord. The knot is second nature, like breathing. Her mother taught her that the knot should never twist. A twisted cord meant a tangled fate. She doesn't know if that's true, but she checks anyway. Girls were told small things like that, rules wrapped in superstition. Don't sew after sunset. Don't let your comb drop to the floor. Don't whistle to the hearth flame. Each tiny rule whispered the same message. The world is fragile, and you must be careful in it. She steps outside. The street is narrow, shadowed by tall brick walls. The neighbor's door is already open, a woman sweeping ashes into the gutter. The air smells faintly sweet, almost like roasted nuts. Someone nearby is baking honey bread for the temple offerings, and you, listening now, might smile because you can picture it. The little girl's sandals brushing dust, her hair coming loose from its ribbon, the sun slowly gilding the rooftops. It's a world both distant and familiar. Every city has its morning rhythm, its quiet workers, its unseen girls making everything run. There's no rush in this walk. Let your mind wander with hers. You can almost feel the rough plaster wall beneath her fingers. Hear the muffled chatter from a window above, two women trading gossip like sparrows. And somewhere, beyond the bustle, beyond the smell of bread and smoke, lies the question that will guide our night. What did it really mean to live under Rome's girl rules? Not the rules written in marble, but the softer, invisible ones that shaped how girls stood, smiled, and survived. The baker's daughter carries a small clay jug. She's headed toward the public fountain to fetch water before the crowds come. Each step echoes softly. She passes the blacksmith's corner, where the first hammer strikes of the day ring like a heartbeat. She nods to an older woman carrying herbs, and though they don't speak, there's a shared understanding, a nod that says, "We both begin again." It's an ordinary Rome morning, yet full of quiet stories, and each one begins with a girl. Some will grow into women who own shops, others will fade into records of marriages or property trades, but all of them start here. In this hush between dawn and daylight, So breathes slowly. Listen to the distant murmur of 1,000 lives beginning. You can almost smell the oil lamps being snuffed, the crust of bread cracking open, the faint tank of iron from water jars. It's a city waking, and in its pulse, the footsteps of girls fill every alley. We'll follow them, one dawn at a time, through kitchens, classrooms, festivals, and fears. You'll see how even under rules they never chose, they found moments of peace, laughter, and clever rebellion. But for now, linger in this morning calm. Watch as the first sunlight hits the red tiles. Feel the warmth creep into the stones. And when the baker's daughter finally lifts her jug and turns toward the fountain, you'll hear her hum just a tiny tune to keep her company. Tomorrow she'll hum it again and again until it becomes part of the city's soundscape. That's how memory works in Rome, through repetition, through rhythm, through girls who never realized they were keeping time. But what happens after the water's fetched, when breakfast begins and the household truly wakes? We'll drift there next. Comment where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. The city is fully awake now. The sound of sandals slapping the cobbles mixes with distant voices, laughter, and the rhythmic splash of water from every public fountain. Imagine yourself standing beside one, the stone worn smooth from countless hands. The water trickles over your fingers, cool and faintly metallic, as you fill a clay jug almost as heavy as you are. A woman nearby adjusts the strap of her tunic and calls softly to her daughter not to spill a drop. The air smells of bread and wet stone. It's the scent of morning in ancient Rome. If this brings you calm, breathe deeply and settle in. Imagine the weight of that jug, the strain in your small arms, and the soft slosh of water with every step back home. A Roman girl's morning was a blend of stillness and motion, chores laced with tiny joys. For many, food preparation began before sunrise. You might hear the clack of grinding stones echoing through narrow alleys, the scrape of pestles against mortar, the faint squeal of clay lids lifted from storage jars. In wealthier homes, slaves handled much of this labor, but even there, girls were expected to learn. The kitchen was the heart of daily life, not just for meals, but for stories, laughter, and lessons whispered between women. Picture a young girl, hair tied back with a strip of linen, leaning over a wooden table. Her mother sprinkles flour made from spelt, the same grain used for centuries. The flour smells nutty, warm even before baking. They mix it with olive oil, salt, and a splash of water, kneading it into soft dough that sticks slightly to their fingers. The oven, a domed clay structure called a fernax, glows orange from embers carried in from the hearth. The heat radiates through the small room, mingling with the smell of smoke and baking bread. A girl might shape small loaves into discs or braids, pressing each with the family seal, a tiny pattern carved into wood or bone. That mark says, "This bread belongs to us," a small symbol of identity in a city that rarely let girls have names that lasted. If you were from a poorer household, your bread might come from the communal ovens. You'd rise early, bring your dough through crowded lanes, and wait your turn at the baker's counter. Imagine the hum of women's voices, the laughter of children chasing each other through the line. Gossip flows faster than the flour dust. Someone whispers about the price of olive oil, another about a neighbor's cousin who caught the eye of a soldier. It's a Roman version of a morning coffee shop, except everyone stands, balancing baskets and babies. For breakfast, the simplest meal of the day, there wasn't much ceremony. Girls might eat a crust of bread dipped in watered wine or milk, maybe sweetened with a smear of honey if the household was lucky. The bread was dense and chewy, the kind that needed strong teeth and patience. Sometimes there'd be olives or dried figs, soft, sticky, and fragrant. And though it might sound plain to us, this meal was comforting, grounding, a start to the long day ahead. In larger homes, breakfast might be a more organized affair. Picture a courtyard filled with filtered light, an indoor fountain murmuring softly. Girls of the household sit together while attendants bring bowls of porridge made from barley or wheat. A nursemaid reminds them to eat slowly, to keep their backs straight, to wipe their fingers on the cloth instead of their tunic. There's discipline in every bite, but also warmth, a quiet moment of connection between generations. One girl named Aurelia, perhaps 13, steals a fig from the basket when no one's looking. She hides the smile behind her hand. Her mother pretends not to notice. In that small exchange, you can feel the tenderness that slipped between rules. Love disguised as patience. The smells of the morning grow stronger as the city stirs. Fresh bread, roasted chickpeas from the street sellers, the faint tang of goat cheese. It's not all pleasant smoke. Refuse. The sour odor of overripe fruit. But to the girls who lived there, this blend of scents was simply home. Imagine walking through a narrow alley now, a loaf wrapped in linen under your arm. The walls are so close you could touch both sides. From an open window above, someone shakes out a blanket, and sunlight filters through the dust like tiny golden sparks. You pass a group of girls laughing as they balance jugs on their heads, the water glinting in thin streams down their arms. Their sandals splash through puddles left from the fountain's overflow. It's noisy, messy, beautiful, and entirely ordinary. Back home, the girl you've been following may be Livia again. The baker's daughter places her loaf on the table and helps her mother stir a pot of lentils. She's careful not to spill. Lentils were the heartbeat of Roman kitchens, humble, nourishing, and forgiving if left too long on the heat. The smell fills the small room, earthy and warm, like comfort made tangible. Her father will eat first when he returns from the bakery. Her brother's next. She'll eat later, when the work slows. This isn't cruelty in her eyes. It's just the rhythm she's learned. But there are moments when she glances at the bread cooling on the sill and imagines what it would be like to take a bite before anyone else. Just once, in another part of the city, a different girl, the daughter of a merchant, practices measuring grain. Her mother teaches her how to stretch a week's supply to last 8 days. They scoop the golden kernels with their hands, the grain slipping through fingers like sand. It's arithmetic taught by touch, economy learned through survival. She learns that food isn't just sustenance, it's planning, patience, and a kind of love that hides in every ration. Even in the grand villas, with tiled mosaics and perfumed air, the girls' mornings echo the same cadence. They eat, they clean, they listen. They learn what the world expects of them by watching their mothers. And yet, in the quiet between chores, they dream sometimes of festivals, sometimes of freedom, sometimes simply of a sweeter fig. As the sun climbs higher, the kitchen quiets, the ovens cool. The girls wipe flour from their hands and braid their hair again, ready for the rest of the day. They don't call it routine, they call it life. But beneath the motions lies something steady and unspoken, a quiet resilience that's older than the city itself. You can almost hear it now, the soft scrape of wooden bowls, the murmur of women sharing a morning meal, the laughter of a girl who knows she gets scolded for stealing the first piece of bread, but steals it anyway. It's a slow, ordinary start to a Roman day. But it's where every story begins, with nourishment, patience, and care. But what happens once the dishes are cleared? When the day opens wide and lessons begin, not for boys, but for the few girls lucky enough to learn letters and stories. We'll drift there next. Comment where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. The morning chores have quieted now. The scent of bread still lingers faintly, but the ovens are cooling, and a different rhythm begins, one of voices, chalk, and the slow scratch of styluses on wax. In Rome, not every girl had a chance to learn her letters, but for those who did, it was a kind of miracle wrapped in everyday routine. Imagine the sound of a wax tablet opening, the faint stickiness as the cover lifts, revealing the smooth, dark surface beneath. A girl's reflection glimmers faintly in the polished wax before she lowers her stylus to begin. If you're listening now, take a slow breath. Picture yourself seated beside her, cross-legged on a cool stone floor, sunlight spilling through a small window high above. You can smell the faint sweetness of beeswax and the sharper tang of ink from a jar nearby. The teacher, or literator, clears his throat softly, not harshly, not kindly, just enough to remind the class to listen. He wears a faded tunic and smells of parchment dust. The girls sit quietly in the corner, separated from the boys who practiced their declensions with loud, stumbling pride. A Roman girl's education depended on fortune and family. In poorer homes, her school might be the kitchen, where numbers were learned through recipes and memory. But in wealthier households, girls might study under private tutors, men or women hired to teach reading, arithmetic, or poetry. They learned from wax tablets, where words were etched and then smoothed away again, like thoughts practiced and forgotten. There was something gentle about that, learning written in impermanence. Aurelia, our imagined student, traces her letters carefully. A, B, C. The stylus feels heavy at first, awkward in her fingers. Each letter must be neat enough for her tutor's nod of approval. She repeats the exercise over and over until her wrist aches. To rest, she blows softly across the wax, watching the faint lines fade as the surface warms. For her, learning is not rebellion, but revelation. Each word opens a door she didn't know existed. But learning wasn't only about words. Girls were taught how to measure cloth, how to read market weights, how to calculate household expenses. Mathematics, disguised as necessity, they counted by touch. Beans, coins, seeds, the ancient version of mental math. The rhythm of it was soothing. 1, 2, 3, 4, then back again. The world balanced in small, repeatable patterns. Sometimes a father would boast about his daughter's reading to friends. "She can quote Virgil," he'd say, even if she could only recall a line or two. In those moments, her learning became a reflection of his status, not her freedom. Still, within those narrow walls, there was power. To read meant to imagine. To imagine meant to dream. And dreaming, even quietly, was its own kind of defiance. You can picture it, a courtyard filled with sound, the hum of voices reciting, the clack of wooden sandals on mosaic floors. The tutor walks slowly between students, correcting posture, adjusting hands, murmuring advice. "Don't press too hard," he says. "Writing should breathe." The words linger. Writing should breathe. Aurelia looks at her tablet and smiles because she understands something beyond the lesson, that words can live, even if only whispered. In smaller homes, learning happens differently. Livia, the baker's daughter, learns her letters from an older neighbor, a widow who once copied temple accounts. They sit together near the window, the light shifting as the day moves. The old woman's voice is soft but steady. "This," she says, tracing with her finger, "is an A. Think of it as the beginning of everything." The girl repeats it, mouth forming the shape of the letter. It's a secret joy, this quiet learning. No one demands it, no one pays for it. It's given freely, like bread shared between friends. Sometimes girls sang their lessons. The alphabet became melody. The multiplication tables turned into rhythm. You can almost hear it now, a small chorus drifting through the alleys. Girls repeating verses about seasons, gods, or grain harvests. It sounds like play, but it's survival in disguise. Knowledge passed through song is harder to silence. A few lucky girls learned poetry, too not to publish, but to remember. They memorized verses about loyalty, virtue, and the turning of the year. Some even wrote their own, carving lines secretly on broken tiles or the backs of wax tablets. Fragments of those words still surface in ruins today, tiny scratches in Latin. Names have fiercest hearts drawn beside them, proof that even under rules imagination slipped through. Imagine sitting beside one of them now, her head bent in concentration. The sun warms the stone floor, the wax softens, and her handwriting wavers slightly as she writes her name, slowly, proudly, beautifully crooked. It's her mark on the world, fragile but real. When she smooths the wax again, the lines vanish, but the memory stays. She remembers the feeling of knowing something new, something entirely her own. Learning wasn't easy for most girls. Some families saw no use in it. "What good are letters?" they'd say, "when you must weave, cook, and keep a house." Yet mothers often found small ways around that rule. They'd slip a broken stylus into a girl's hand, or leave a tablet open on the table with words half finished. "Just in case you want to try," they'd say, and she would. Curiosity finds cracks even in stone walls. As you listen, maybe you can hear the faint rhythm of styluses tapping, the soft murmur of repetition. Imagine the smell of parchment, the dust motes dancing in sunlight. There's peace in this space, a stillness between the lines of Latin and the sound of distant footsteps. One day, years later, that same girl might teach her own daughter in secret. She'll sit her down beside a window and whisper, "Here's how you write your name." Don't forget the curve. She won't call it rebellion, she call it habit, a small, persistent flame passed from one quiet hand to another. Education for girls in Rome wasn't loud or celebrated. It lived in the hush of kitchens, in courtyards at noon, in borrowed scraps of parchment, but through it, they learned how to think, how to hope, how to see the world beyond the walls they cleaned. The lesson ends. The tutor nods. The girls close their tablets and smooth the wax flat with the back of their the marks vanish, leaving only faint impressions, like ripples after a stone sinks beneath water. It's time to return home, to trade the scent of beeswax for olive oil, the whisper of poetry for the rustle of fabric. As the day deepens, the streets grow warmer, busier, louder. The world outside their lessons waits, filled with fabrics, mirrors, and the daily ritual of beauty that comes next. But what happened when the learning stopped, and the combs and oils came out? When hair became a language, and beauty rules shaped every glance? We'll drift there next. Comment where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. The lessons have ended, and the light has shifted. Outside, the air hums with the late morning warmth of Rome, but inside, a different ritual begins. The wax tablets are closed, the styluses tucked away, and in their place come combs, ribbons, and the scent of olive oil warmed by the sun. Every girl in Rome, no matter how rich or poor, knew that her appearance was part of her language, a silent way of saying, I belong, even if she had little choice in how. If this brings you calm, take a slow breath. Imagine the hush of a small room, the lights soft and gold, dust floating lazily in the air. A girl sits before a polished bronze mirror, not glass, but gleaming metal. Its reflection is blurred, almost dreamlike. She tilts it to catch the light, and her own face shimmers back at her, imperfect and wavering. That's how beauty looked in ancient Rome, softened by metal and imagination. In poorer homes, there was no mirror at all. A girl might see her reflection only in the still water of a basin, or the dark shine of an amph. She'd smooth her hair by touch alone, fingers moving carefully, trusting the memory of motion. In richer households, a slave might assist brushing, oiling, braiding. The brush itself was carved from wood or bone, its bristles stiff, but kind once warmed. You can almost hear it now, the gentle scrape through hair, the rustle of linen, the quiet sigh as tangles yield. Hair in Rome wasn't just decoration, it was a statement. Loose hair meant girlhood, innocence, a kind of openness to the world. Braided or bound hair meant duty, maturity, modesty. Women tied their hair in knots, loops, and crowns, elaborate or simple depending on the day. But even young girls learned early that hair could speak before they did. Lucy, a merchant's daughter, watches her mother weave ribbons into her braid. The fabric is soft, dyed with madder root, a shade of faint rose. Her mother tells her that neatness brings respect, not because the gods demand it, but because people notice what looks cared for. Keep your hair tidy, she says, and they'll believe your thoughts are tidy too. Lucia doesn't quite understand, but she nods, storing the lesson away. In the same city, the baker's daughter Livia does her own hair. She uses a strip of worn cloth and a bit of olive oil to keep the strands from frizzing. There's no mirror, no ribbon, just her fingers, her patience, and the rhythm of practice. She hums a tune as she works, and in that moment, she feels just as graceful as any senator's child. Beauty, to her, is something you make with what you have. Roman beauty had its own rules, subtle, often contradictory ones. Pale skin was prized among the wealthy because it meant you stayed indoors, but a healthy glow from the sun wasn't shameful for those who worked. Smooth skin was admired, though the remedies for keeping it that way were inventive. Girls learned early about pastes made from barley and honey, masks from crushed rose petals or chalk, even lotions of sheep's wool grease mixed with vinegar. The smell must have been sharp and strange, but they swore by it. You can imagine the laughter between women as they prepared these mixtures. A bowl of flour, a splash of milk, a handful of petals, part science, part superstition. The goddess Venus used this. Someone might whisper. Whether she did or not didn't matter. What mattered was the belief that care itself, the act of tending, smoothing, cleaning, connected them to something divine. Clothing carried its own weight of meaning. Most girls wore a simple tunic, belted at the waist. The fabric could be rough or fine depending on fortune, but the cut was always modest, wide at the shoulders, falling just past the knees. For richer families, a stola or palla would be added later. flowing fabric wrapped gracefully over one shoulder. The color spoke volumes: white for purity, soft yellows and blues for gentleness, deeper reds for wealth. Imagine walking through a Roman street and seeing all those shades moving together, linen fluttering in the breeze, sandals scuffing on stone, the occasional flash of gold thread catching the sun. It wasn't the marble statues that gave Rome its beauty, it was the living tapestry of its people. And within that, girls learned how to stand, how to hold their hands, how to walk with the quiet balance expected of them. But there were moments of rebellion, small and almost invisible. A ribbon tied in an unapproved color, a tunic hem shortened for comfort, a girl choosing not to cover her hair when the wind was too hot. These tiny acts, though unnoticed by history, were sparks of individuality, whispers of "I am still me" in a world that prized conformity. Even jewelry told a story. The wealthy wore earrings of gold or amber, bracelets carved with dolphins or vines. Poorer girls made do with bits of glass or shells, polished smooth. There was superstition in every piece, charms shaped like hands or eyes protected against envy. Some mothers tied small bells around their daughters' wrists to ward off bad spirits, a soft jingle following them through the day like a heartbeat at festivals. The rules relaxed slightly. Girls might dust their cheeks with red ochre or add a touch of perfume from rose oil. The scent drifted through the streets, blending with incense and baked honey cakes. It wasn't vanity. It was participation, a way of saying, "I am part of this city, too." Still, not every girl loved the weight of expectation. Some felt the pinch of belts drawn too tight, the sting of oil in their eyes, the constant correction of posture and poise. They smiled when told, they sat still when expected, but inside, many longed for moments of release, bare feet on the grass outside the city walls, hair unbound in the wind, laughter unmeasured. If you listen closely, you can almost hear that laughter now. It echoes softly across centuries, carried through stone courtyards and tiled baths, through the quiet moments between the rituals of beauty. Because beauty rules weren't about mirrors, they were about belonging. Every braid, every ribbon, every clean tunic whispered the same lesson: fit in, stay safe, be seen but never too loudly. Yet, in every careful movement, girls found ways to claim a little space for themselves. A flower tucked behind the ear, a small secret smile reflected in bronze. The sun is high now, and the day has shifted again. The combs are put away, the ribbons tied. The city grows louder beyond the walls. Market shouts, laughter, footsteps. The mirror catches one last glint of light before it's set down. And with that, our Roman girls turn toward the next task of the day, tending the home, caring for family, keeping the tiny universe around them steady and bright. But what did that world look like? The chores, the warmth, the care, the quiet routines that filled every hour. We'll drift there next. Comment where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. The city outside hums like a heartbeat now. By midday, the sun turns the stones pale and warm to the touch. From every open doorway drifts a new symphony of smells: simmering stews, drying laundry, olive oil warming in clay bowls. Inside, the rhythm of the Roman home takes over, quiet but constant. This is where most girls spent their days, where time stretched in soft, repeating loops of care, chores, and small sacred details. If this brings you calm, take a slow breath. Imagine stepping through the doorway of a Roman home. The air is cooler here, scented faintly of smoke and time. The walls are painted in soft colors, faded reds, ochres the blue of worn sky. Light spills in through the open atrium above, where a square of sky looks down like an unblinking eye. Beneath it lies a shallow pool to collect rainwater, shimmering softly, reflecting every movement in the room. A girl named Livia kneels beside that pool now, dipping a small cup to fill a jug. The water ripples gently, and she can see her own reflection shimmer across the surface. Her mother's voice calls from the kitchen, and she stands quickly, careful not to spill. She's learning the art of moving quietly, the skill that every Roman girl absorbed like breath. Home was a world of sounds and smells. The scrape of a broom on stone floors, the creak of a wooden chest, the faint hiss of oil in a pan. Girls grew up inside that orchestra of ordinary things. For Livia, her duties were endless but familiar: sweeping, folding, mending, helping to grind grain, polishing the small bronze lamp before dusk. The lamp is her favorite task. It's shaped like a tiny animal, a lion, fierce and calm. She cleans it with a scrap of linen until it gleams faintly. Her mother says, light is a blessing that must be earned, and so Livia takes her time, breathing softly, watching the golden sheen return under her cloth dot. In wealthier homes, the chores were delegated, but daughters still learned how to manage them. The goal wasn't labor, but understanding how much olive oil a week required, how to store grain against damp, how to stretch a candle to last longer by trimming the wick just so. Even girls of comfort were expected to know the invisible systems that kept a house alive. Imagine a villa courtyard filled with sun. The daughter of a senator walks slowly beneath the pergola, her sandals whispering against mosaic tiles. A servant follows with a basket of linens, but the girl stops to touch one, to feel if it's truly dry, to check for the smell of smoke from the drying fire. Her mother had said, "A lady who doesn't know her household scent doesn't know her household." It was a strange kind of wisdom, but it stayed with her. At the same hour across the city, the scribe's niece sits by a window mending a torn sleeve. She's quick with her hands, looping thread through fabric with the easy rhythm of someone who's done it 100 times. Outside, a hawker calls out the price of figs. Children laugh. A cart creaks past. She hums softly as she works. Her thread isn't just thread, it's time, patience, a quiet form of love that holds things together. Girls in Rome often shared this same pattern of movement, practical, repetitive, and strangely peaceful. Even the smallest tasks carried layers of meaning. Sweeping dust from the threshold wasn't only about cleansing, it was an offering of welcome to household gods. Washing the floor wasn't just habit, it was devotion, the kind that never needed words. And those gods, the Lares and Penates, watched from their tiny shrines tucked into corners. A girl might pass them a dozen times a day, leaving bits of bread, a drop of wine, or a flower plucked from the courtyard. The flicker of their lamps was a comfort, a sign that protection still lingered in the walls. In a small apartment, space was scarce. Beds were stacked, baskets tucked under stools. The kitchen barely large enough for two. The smell of smoke clung to everything, tunics, hair, dreams. Yet even in that crowded quiet, there were moments of beauty. When her chores slowed, Livia liked to sit by the open window and watch light climb the opposite wall, turning dust motes into gold. She would rest her chin on her knees and imagine that the wall was a map, and that somewhere beyond it, the sky opened wider than any street she'd ever walked. Older girls helped care for siblings or elders. Feeding a baby was a full-time act of patience. You can picture it, a young girl, hair coming loose, cradling her brother while rocking him gently, her foot tapping an old rhythm her mother used to hum. In the corner, an elderly grandmother watches with tired, knowing eyes. "Keep him warm," she says softly. The gods favor warmth. It's advice that feels both simple and infinite. Home also meant craft. The afternoon hours brought weaving, the rhythmic click of the loom, the sigh of thread pulled tight. A girl learned early how to keep tension even, how to twist fibers so they didn't fray. The colors came from plants, madder for red, woad for blue, saffron for gold. Each thread carried the earth's memory, dyed by hand and patience. Weaving wasn't just work, it was storytelling. Patterns held meaning, waves for journeys, vines for growth, stars for protection. Sometimes girls added small, secret symbols, a crooked line, a hidden letter, messages only they would recognize later. In that way, even obedience became a canvas for imagination. By late afternoon, the house quieted again. You can almost hear it, the slowing footsteps, the sigh of completed work. The courtyard fills with softer sounds, a pigeon cooing, a jug set down, the faint buzz of distant voices from the street. The light turns amber, and the stone floors breathe out the warmth they've stored all day. Livia helps her mother prepare the evening meal. Lentils again, bread reheated, a handful of herbs. The family gathers, not around a table as we might imagine, but sitting on stools or low couches. Conversation is simple. Her father asks about the grain supply. Her brothers speak of the bakery. Her mother reminds her to check the oil in the lamp before bed. It's a routine as steady as the stars. Yet, as night begins to fall, another feeling stirs. One every Roman girl knew. When the lamps were lit, and the shadows stretched longer, the world outside changed. The streets that once felt alive now seemed uncertain, even dangerous. And so, before dusk fully claimed the city, she would step to the doorway, glance toward the fading sky, and close the shutters tight. Inside, the lamps glowed. The flickering light made the walls seem to breathe. The day was over, but the night brought its own set of quiet rules. Rules of safety, silence, and trust. But what happened when the lamps were snuffed and the streets went dark? What did it mean to move through Rome after sunset, when safety itself was something fragile and earned? We'll drift there next. Comment where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. The lamps have been lit, their small flames tremble like stars trapped in clay. Outside, Rome's day has folded in on itself, the noise thinning, the air cooling, the city turning from gold to shadow. This was the hour when girls moved closer to home, when the line between safety and fear grew soft and uncertain. The world belonged to night now, and night in Rome had its own quiet rules. If this brings you calm, take a slow breath. Imagine standing at the doorway, the light of a single lamp spilling out into the alley. The stones still hold the day's warmth, and the air smells of smoke and figs. Far away, someone laughs, a man's voice, too loud, already thick with wine. A cartwheel rattles over cobbles, fading toward the forum, and somewhere, a dog barks, the sound bouncing off narrow walls like an echo from another world. For girls, the city after dark was both familiar and forbidden. It was the same streets, the same doors and fountains, but seen differently. Like a reflection in water that ripples and blurs. Lamps hung outside shops, but most went out early. Moonlight did the rest, falling unevenly across archways and shuttered stalls. Livia, the baker's daughter, helps her mother snuff the lamp in the main room. They leave only one burning, the one beside the household gods. The flicker plays across the small clay figures, their painted eyes seeming almost alive. Her mother murmurs a blessing under her breath. Then she turns to the door, checking the bolt twice. The city sleeps, she says softly, but it never dreams kindly. That was Rome's truth after dusk. Evenings were beautiful. Yes, the sound of lutes from taverns, the smell of roasting chestnuts from street vendors. But for most women and girls, those belonged to someone else's night. Theirs was the quieter one, inside, where the warmth of the hearth was safety enough. Still, not every girl stayed behind her door. Some had errands that couldn't wait, fetching water, tending an elder, or bringing food to a neighbor. They wrapped their cloaks tightly, pulled hoods over their hair, and moved quickly through the shadows. The lucky ones had a brother or father to walk beside them. The rest relied on lantern light and instinct. Imagine walking with one now, a girl carrying a small oil lamp, her hand trembling slightly with each step. The flame wavers, casting long, restless shadows. Every sound feels amplified. Footsteps, a cough, the creak of a shutter. The streets twist and narrow until she can't see more than a few steps ahead. She knows the route by memory, left at the butcher's corner, right past the fountain, but still her breath quickens. And then, a voice calls softly, a friend, another girl, waiting near the fountain with her own lamp. They exchange a glance and walk together, side by side, the flames flickering in rhythm. The fear doesn't vanish, but it shrinks a little in the warmth of companionship. That's how safety worked then, not from walls or guards, but from presence, from the simple act of not being alone. In wealthier districts, the night looked different, but felt much the same. Marble courtyards glowed in lamplight, perfumed smoke curled through the air, and laughter drifted from dinner parties. But even behind those walls, mothers reminded daughters, don't wander after dark. They spoke of thieves, of gossip, of danger, but beneath those warnings was something more ancient, a protective rhythm learned from generations before them, so the girls stayed inside, spinning wool under lamplight, or whispering stories to one another before sleep. The light painted their faces gold, their shadows long. Sometimes they talked of the outside world, of temples lit with torches, of men singing in the streets, of stars reflected in the Tiber, and wondered what it might feel like to walk freely, without fear or permission. But there was peace in their seclusion too. Imagine the sound of wool sliding through fingers, the rhythmic creak of a spindle. A mother hums an old tune to keep the girls company. The song has no name, but its melody is as old as the city. It speaks of hearth fires that never go out, of hands that keep the light alive. In the corner, a small bronze lamp flickers beside the family's shrine. Its flame bends toward the girl's breath. She whispers a wish not aloud, not even fully formed, something between prayer and hope. Maybe for love, maybe for safety, maybe just for morning to come without trouble. The flame wavers, then steadies. The night deepens. Outside, the streets grow quieter still. The wine shops close. The last carts pass. The air turns cool enough to raise goosebumps. You can almost hear it now. The hush of sleeping homes. The drip of water from a fountain. The faint rustle of a cat slipping through shadows. A group of watchmen passes by, torches in hand, their sandals scuffing the ground. Their voices are low but reassuring, part of the city's nightly rhythm. One calls out the hour, the way a clock might in another time. 3:30, he says, his tone calm, practiced. The sound fades, leaving only silence again. In her small bed, Livia lies awake for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of the city, a closing gate, a cart rumbling far away. Her sister sleeps beside her, breathing slow and steady. The faint smell of olive oil and smoke lingers in the room. She closes her eyes and imagines dawn, the warmth returning, the birds calling from the rooftops, the safety of light, because that's what night meant in Rome for girls. Patience, waiting for the sun to rise again, waiting for the world to become kind once more. Still, sometimes, if you could step quietly into those old streets, you might see another kind of night unfolding, one not of fear but of wonder. Somewhere, a girl stands on a rooftop, watching the stars, her hair loose in the wind. The city below her breathes, vast and restless. She traces the constellations her tutor once named, and whispers their stories to herself. For a moment, she feels limitless, as if the sky is hers alone. Then she turns, and the wind carries her whisper away. The lamps will burn down soon, the oil will thin, and the wicks will sputter. But before sleep, there's always that last glance toward the doorway, the faint prayer whispered to the goddess of the hearth, the hope that tomorrow will come as gently as today ended. The night in Rome wasn't only danger, it was reflection. The city's pulse slowed enough to let girls think about their homes, their dreams, the paths they'd one day walk when the rules allowed. And as you breathe slowly now, imagine those lamps flickering one by one across the hills, tiny islands of light in a sea of dark, each one tended by hands like theirs, each one a promise that morning always returns. But what happens when the morning comes again, and the city wakes with all its noise and color, when girls step into markets filled with chatter, coins, and the quick dance of trade? We'll drift there next. Comment where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. The sun returns, spilling light across the rooftops of Rome. The city exhales, stretching back to life after the hush of night. You can almost feel it, the hum beneath your feet, the scent of bread and clay in the air, the calls echoing through narrow streets. This is morning in the markets, where the rules of girlhood mix with the rhythms of trade, where learning isn't done with tablets or tutors, but through touch, voice, and instinct. If this brings you calm, take a long, slow breath. Imagine walking through the markets of ancient Rome, your sandals tapping on worn stones. The air is warm already, but not yet heavy. Around you, the world moves like water, sellers calling prices, donkeys braying, the faint ring of scales weighing grain. It's a living soundscape, layered and bright. For a Roman girl, the market was a test of awareness. Livia, the baker's daughter, walks with a small purse tied beneath her belt. The cords are knotted twice, the way her mother taught her. One not for caution, she'd said, and one for luck. Inside, there are a few bronze coins, still warm from her mother's hand. The market smells alive, of olives and smoke, of leather and sweet wine, of humanity itself. Rows of vendors line the street, their stalls shaded by faded cloths. On one side, baskets overflow with figs, some split and sticky in the heat. On the other, jars of honey gleam like amber in the morning sun. There's the hiss of oil as a woman fries chickpeas, and the soft crackle of loaves cooling on wooden racks. Everywhere, voices deep, high, quick, patient. Bargaining is a dance, and every girl who enters the market learns its steps. Too much, she says, lifting a handful of lentils. These were cheaper yesterday. The seller laughs, shakes his head, and counters. It's half play, half performance. And though her mother stands nearby, pretending not to listen, she hides a small smile when her daughter gets a better price. For the wealthier girls, markets were both wonder and warning. Lucia, the merchant's daughter, walks through with her nursemaid and 2 guards. The stalls fascinate her, the bright fabrics, the copper cups, the tiny carved charms shaped like eyes and hands. Her fingers itch to touch them, but she's not supposed to. Her mother's words echo in her mind. Observe, don't linger. Curiosity invites trouble. Still, she can't help it. She lingers, she learns. A woman selling wool greets her with a kind smile. Soft hands, the woman says, pressing a skein of dyed thread into Lucia's palm. Not made for weaving, but maybe for counting coins. Lucia blushes, unsure if it's a compliment or a tease. But later, she remembered the warmth of that wool, and the quiet power in the woman's voice. The market teaches lessons no school could. How to weigh honesty against price. How to sense when someone's lying from the way their eyes flick toward the scale. How to count change while pretending not to care. Even the smallest girls learn to measure by sight and touch, to know when a handful of grain was light, when the coin felt wrong, when a smile hid a trick, and amid the noise, there's laughter too. You can almost hear it, bright, effortless, contagious. A group of girls share roasted nuts from a paper cone, giggling as one drops a few. A boy nearby offers to help pick them up, but one of the girls just smirks and says, "We've got it." The moment passes, small and ordinary, yet alive with the spark of everyday courage. For the poorer girls, the market was also a workplace. Some carried water, some swept the stones, others sold herbs or figs from baskets they'd gathered before dawn. Their earnings were small, but their sense of the city was vast. They knew every shortcut, every stall where the price could be coaxed lower, every alley where bread was traded for favors or news. They were, in many ways, the invisible pulse of Rome, keeping its mornings running, unseen but essential. Money itself was simple but powerful. Bronze for daily things, silver for ceremony, gold for the unreachable world of senators and nobles. Girls learned the feel of each coin by touch, the raised images of gods, the smoothness worn from countless hands. A single as could buy a handful of olives. A denarius might feed a family for days. Every clink of metal carried both survival and story. Sometimes, small kindnesses unfolded among strangers. An older woman sees Livia struggling with her jug and offers to steady it. "Careful," she says, "water's heavier than pride." They share a laugh that smells of time and sunlight. In that brief exchange, two lives separated by years and fortune meet and recognize each other. The market wasn't just about trade. It was the city's gossip network, its pulse of connection. Girls learned who was getting married, who was sick, which baker had burned his loaves, which temple was hiring handmaids for the next festival. They collected these details like pebbles in a pocket, carried home to mothers and sisters who wove them into conversation over dinner. When the sun climbed higher, shadows grew shorter, and the air shimmered with heat. The calls of vendors grew louder, more urgent. Children darted between stalls, chasing dropped fruit, and the scent of sweat mingled with the sweetness of figs. It was chaotic, yes, but to those who lived it daily, it was comforting proof that the city was alive, that the day was unfolding as it should. As the hours stretched, Livia counted her coins again. 2 left, enough for lentils tomorrow. She tucked them back beneath her belt and wiped the dust from her hands. Around her, women lifted baskets, folded cloths, gathered what was left. The market would sleep soon, only to rise again tomorrow, just as it always had. Walking home, her feet sore, she feels a small swell of pride. She'd bought wisely, spoken clearly, made her own choices. Tiny victories, but hers nonetheless. At a crossroads, she stops for a moment. The sun catches the bronze coin through her belt and makes it glint like a secret. She smiles, not for anyone else but for herself, because in that single moment she feels capable, a quiet triumph, born from nothing more than a morning spent learning how the world moves. And beyond the markets, the city hums on. The temples begin to ring their bells, signaling the next rhythm of the day. The rituals, the offerings, the quiet prayers that keep Rome's heartbeat steady. Girls carry home flowers or oil, preparing to tend to their household gods. The sun dips slightly, shadows stretch again, and the scent of incense drifts through the air. The markets have taught her much: how to speak, how to trade, how to trust her own eyes. But what happens when she steps home again, where the air is thick with smoke and song, and the rituals of faith begin? What did Roman girls believe, and how did they find comfort in their gods and goddesses? We'll drift there next. Comment where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. The air grows softer as afternoon fades, the sounds of the market replaced by quieter rhythms, the hush of doorways closing, the murmur of prayers carried on the wind. Rome never truly slept, but at this hour, the city slowed just enough for devotion to slip in between the noise. And for its girls, faith was not only belief, it was routine, comfort, and connection. If this brings you peace, take a slow breath and let yourself drift there. The light is warm, gold turning to amber. Somewhere, an incense stick smolders in a small clay holder, the smoke curling like silk ribbons in the air. Imagine standing inside a Roman home now, where the scent of oil lamps mingles with rosemary and myrrh. Livia, the baker's daughter, has returned from the market. Her mother waits by the small household shrine, the Lurarium. It's tucked into a corner of the atrium, painted with tiny images of protective spirits. Little clay figures stand guard beside a bowl of fresh fruit and a cup of wine. Above them, a flickering lamp throws shadows that seem to move. For the Lares, her mother says softly. For the ones who watch, together they place offerings: a piece of bread, a splash of wine, a whisper of thanks. The ritual is small, quiet, and beautiful in its simplicity. Livia doesn't understand every word of the prayer, but she knows the feeling it brings, the sense that someone is listening, even if unseen. Faith, for girls in Rome, lived in small acts like this, gestures woven into daily life. Lighting a lamp carefully so the flame caught on the first try, touching the threshold before leaving home, whispering a goddess's name under the breath when danger felt close. These were their invisible armors, their ways of asking the world to be gentle. In the grand temples, the rituals were grander too. Imagine walking into one, the air thick with incense, the sound of sandals echoing against stone. Columns rise like trees, sunlight spilling through in narrow beams. At the altar, a priestess moved slowly, her robe of white linen edged in gold. Behind her, a girl no older than 12 stands watching, clutching a basket of grain. She's training to become a vestalist, a handmaid of the goddess Vesta, guardian of the sacred flame that must never go out. She's nervous, but proud. The fire crackles softly, its warmth steady. Every day, she helps sweep the temple floor, polish the vessels, and tend the hearth that symbolizes Rome's heart. To her, this duty feels both holy and human, the same care she would give to her own household, just on a larger, sacred scale. Girls like her, chosen as Vestal virgins, lived different lives than most. They were honored, protected, even feared in a way. Their task was simple but immense: to keep Rome's spirit alive through flame. For 30 years, they would serve their childhood and womanhood bound to light. And when the city slept, they kept watch, their white veils glowing in the lamplight. But for most girls, religion was less about temples and more about touch. The feel of cool water poured over hands before a meal, the texture of laurel leaves woven into wreaths, the smell of salt scattered on thresholds to keep bad luck away. Faith wasn't distant or formal, it was woven into fabric and breath. Even children had their rituals. On the festival of Matronalia, girls would braid flowers into their mother's hair, offering small garlands as symbols of love and gratitude. On Lemuria, they learned to clap their hands in doorways to chase away restless spirits. They whispered the words their mothers had whispered before them: Manes excite paterni, spirits of the ancestors, depart in peace. Lucia, the merchant's daughter, has her own small shrine in her room, a shelf with a clay Venus, chipped at the edge. Every morning she brushes its surface clean with a cloth and places a petal there. She doesn't know if Venus hears her, but she feels calmer afterward, as though the act itself steadies her heart. Sometimes she tells the goddess secrets she can't tell anyone else, small confessions that dissolve into the air, kept safely by stone and silence. In a city full of rules and eyes, these quiet rituals were freedom. A girl could pray for her family's safety, or for a friend's good fortune, or in the privacy of her thoughts, for her own small hopes, to be seen, to be understood, to belong. Religion gave girls stories. 2 tales of goddesses who endured and transformed: Diana, who ruled the forests and answered to no man; Vesta, who guarded the eternal fire; Minerva, who carried wisdom like a sword. These figures weren't just myths, they were models for quiet strength. When a girl learned of them, she saw possibilities beyond her walls. Even festivals, though crowded and noisy, had moments of tenderness. Picture the Floralia, the spring festival of flowers. Girls gather in groups, threading garlands of roses and poppies, laughing as petals stick to their hair. The streets smell sweet, the air is warm, and for one day, beauty feels like celebration rather than duty. Coins are tossed, music plays, And for a few precious hours, everyone, women, men, children, moves together beneath a canopy of color. At dusk, the music fades, and families walk home with flower crowns drooping and candles flickering low. The festivals end, but their rhythm lingers, a heartbeat of joy within the city's more serious pulse. Back home, Livia sits beside her mother again, both watching the small household flame. The oil crackles softly, the shadows on the wall move like memories. When you're older, her mother says, you'll have your own gods to care for, but until then, these will listen for you. Livia nods, her eyes heavy but peaceful. Outside, the night deepens. The stars above Rome blink faintly through the haze of smoke and light. Somewhere, the sacred fire still burns, tended by unseen hands. Steady as breath. Faith, for Roman girls, was not about grandeur. It was about constancy, the keeping of small promises, the tending of flame, the repetition of gestures that made the world feel safe and known. In a life full of rules they didn't choose, it was the one ritual that asked nothing in return but care. The lamp burns lower. The room grows quiet. You can almost smell the fading incense. Feel the soft warmth of the clay bowl cooling in your hands. Tomorrow will bring new tasks and new worries. But for now, in this pool of golden light, the world feels gentle. Still, Rome's girls had more to learn from life, about health, healing, and how to care for their bodies in a time without comfort or certainty. What happened when illness came, or when exhaustion settled too deep? We'll drift there next. Comment where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. The night has lifted once more, and morning light seeps into the quiet corners of the home. It touches the clay jars stacked along the wall, glints off bronze cups, and settles on the sleeping faces of those who worked through yesterday's long rhythms. But one girl is already awake, not to fetch water this time, but to tend to something quieter, something fragile. Her mother's voice, softer than usual, calls from the next room. Bring the basket, she whispers, the one with the herbs. If this brings you calm, breathe in deeply. Imagine the faint, clean scent of crushed rosemary, the sharper trace of vinegar, the distant sweetness of honey. The Roman world was full of noise and power and heat, but when it came to healing, everything slowed down. Time itself seemed to pause as mothers, midwives, and daughters turned to what they trusted most: plants, patience, and prayer. Livia carries the basket carefully, its contents rustling with every step. Inside are sprigs of thyme, a small clay jar of oil, and a folded piece of cloth that smells faintly of smoke. Her mother's hands move with quiet certainty, mixing a paste to soothe a fever. The pestle presses against the mortar in a soft, rhythmic circle, the sound almost hypnotic. There is no rush. Healing, in this world, isn't about speed. It's about faith in the earth, in the gods, and in the slow return of strength. Girls in Rome learned medicine early, not from scrolls or physicians, but from observation. How to cool a burn with water from the courtyard pool. How to wrap a wound with strips of linen dipped in honey, a natural salve that drew out infection. How to brew tea from mint leaves to ease a cough, or from poppy seeds when the pain grew sharp. Even the poorest homes had some form of remedy tucked away. A bundle of herbs, a whispered charm, a story that gave the illness a name and a cure. Imagine standing in that kitchen now. The air hums with small sounds, the grinding of herbs, the trickle of water poured from a jug, the rustle of cloth. A girl leans over the pot, watching the mixture swirl. Steam rises, carrying with it the smell of sage and vinegar. Her mother dips a finger, tastes, nods. Not too bitter, she says. The gods will accept it. Illness in ancient Rome came easily from heat, from spoiled food, from the crowded streets. For girls, there were other risks too. The strain of labor, too young. The wear of long days spent weaving or carrying water. And yet, amid these dangers, women became the quiet keepers of health. They tended wounds, birthed babies, eased fevers, and buried the lost, all with grace that left no trace in the history books. In a wealthier villa across the city, Lucia's tutor teaches her about herbs from scrolls imported from Greece. He names them solemnly: salvia for the blood, ruta for protection, verbena for the gods. She writes the words carefully on her wax tablet, not knowing yet how powerful they truly are. Later, she watches the household's healer, an older woman named Albania, prepare a balm for her mother's aching joints. The woman hums as she works, a tune older than Rome itself. Lucia realizes then that healing isn't learned from books, It's remembered, like a story passed through hands instead of words. For many girls, the first lessons of care came through tending others, a feverish sibling, a friend who fainted in the summer heat. They learned to recognize the look in someone's eyes before illness took hold, the tremor in their hands that meant exhaustion, the color that returned to cheeks when the body began to heal. These were sacred observations, unspoken yet universal. At the baths, where women and girls gathered weekly, health became communal. The warm air echoed with laughter, gossip, and the splash of water. A girl might sit beside her mother, soaking in mineral heat that smelled faintly of sulfur. The walls were painted with dolphins and flowers. The steam softened every voice. There, remedies were shared like secrets. A little honey in the milk, one woman might say. Rub olive oil on the temples at night. They spoke not as healers, but as witnesses, women who had survived long enough to learn what worked. There were doctors, too, mostly men, mostly distant. Some were skilled, others cruel. But for ordinary girls, the trusted cure came from home. The physician might prescribe a powder of herbs, but it was the mother who brewed it, the daughter who watched and waited. The act of care itself was half the medicine. You can almost see it now, the soft glow of a lamp, the curve of a wooden spoon stirring a pot, the gentle hand pressing a cool cloth to a forehead. Outside, the city roars, but inside this room, there is only quiet persistence. And when healing failed, rituals stepped in where herbs could not. Offerings were left at temples, wax figurines shaped like the body part in pain, tiny legs, hands, hearts. Girls would press them into the altar, whispering prayers. Let this arm grow strong again. Let the fever fade. The priests collected the offerings until the altars overflowed, proof of how many had asked for mercy, and how many believed it might come. There was also faith in touch. When a midwife's hands guided new life into the world, when a daughter brushed her mother's hair as she recovered, when a friend pressed her palm to another's shoulder in reassurance, all were acts of healing. None required magic, only presence. Health in ancient Rome was fragile, but it was cherished. A girl who could keep her family well, even for a season, was honored quietly in the way her name was spoken. She has steady hands, people said. She knows how to keep the fever low. It was a reputation built not on grandeur, but on calm. Now, imagine night returning to that same home. The fever has broken. The lamp burns low. Livia sits beside her sleeping mother, still awake, watching the light flicker against the wall. She hums softly, a song she half remembers from childhood. There's peace in her exhaustion, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that for one more night, everyone under this roof breathes safely. Outside, the air cools. A single star peeks through the city's haze. Somewhere, far off, another family repeats the same ritual, crushing herbs, whispering prayers, lighting a lamp. The cycle continues, carried by women who understood that care was not weakness, but the oldest strength of all. Tomorrow, when dawn returns, life will begin again. Work will call, hands will labor, and the city's hum will rise anew. But for now, in this small moment between exhaustion and rest, peace feels close enough to touch. The next day will bring its own rhythm, the steady labor of craft and trade, the art of turning work into pride, because health, once regained, must be used in the workshops, the looms, the clay pits, and the kitchens, where girls turned skill into survival. But how did they work? What did their hands create? And how did those quiet labors shape the city itself? We'll drift there next. Comment where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. Morning returns like a slow, familiar friend. The air smells faintly of smoke and bread, but the rhythm of the city has changed again. The market noise hums beyond the walls. The fountains spill their endless songs. And in homes, courtyards, and workshops, Rome's girls turn to work, the kind that leaves traces on fabric, on clay, on their fingertips, and quietly, on history. If this brings you peace, take a breath. Settle in. Imagine the feeling of sunlight stretching across a workbench, dust rising like gold from a basket of wool. You can hear the faint squeak of a loom tightening its threads, the soft whistle of someone humming to pass the hours. Work was never just labor here. It was rhythm, order, a language that spoke through touch. Livia, the baker's daughter, has finished the morning bread run. Now she sits by the window with a spindle in her lap. Her mother taught her to twist wool into thread, a task that looks simple, but demands patience and precision. The wool catches sometimes, tangling, and she exhales through her nose, untangling it gently. The spindle hums as it spins, its wooden body smooth from years of use. This hum is familiar, like a heartbeat for the home. Spinning was one of the first skills girls learned. Every household needed thread, and every woman, no matter how highborn, was expected to know how to make it. Wealthy girls like Lucia might use fine imported wool dyed in subtle shades, while poorer girls used coarser fibers, spun thick to last longer. But the act itself was the same: draw, twist, release, repeat. It was meditation before the word existed. Some families owned small workshops, places where the air hung heavy with the smell of dye or baked clay. Imagine walking into one now, a narrow room, open to the street, filled with baskets, pots, tools. The floor is warm underfoot, the color of old bread. A girl named Flavia sits by the door, her sleeves rolled, hands stained purple from crushed woad. She's helping her aunt dye cloth, dunking linen into steaming vats, then pulling it out to dry in the sun. The fabric drips, leaving tiny blue constellations on the floor. Flavia smiles as she works. The stains don't bother her. They are her signature, proof of her trade. In Rome, work was rarely divided cleanly between home and market. The same hands that kneaded bread also shaped clay or twisted cord. Girls learned early to adapt, to be makers of many things. Some families sold pottery, others crafted sandals, candles, combs, or perfumes. There were girls who polished metal mirrors until they shone, who strung beads for necklaces, who embroidered the hems of tunics bound for the temples. Work could be tedious, but it was also power in disguise. A girl who could weave well could always feed her family. One who could keep accounts might one day run a stall on her own. Many did, unofficially, quietly, through persistence. Inscriptions still survive naming women as cloth merchants, spice sellers, and money. Their stories hide in the margins of stone, but they were real. In a small street near the Twiba, two sisters work side by side in a candle shop. Their fingers move quickly, dipping wicks into warm tallow, pulling them out, letting them cool, then dipping again. The room glows faintly, lit by its own craft. The smell is thick beeswax, smoke, and lavender oil. They don't talk much. The rhythm of dipping and cooling fills the silence like conversation. The younger one, only 12, sometimes sneaks bits of leftover wax to shape tiny figures, birds, stars, even the face of her dog. Her sister pretends not to see. It's her small rebellion, her art within the labor. In grounder homes, women's crafts became refinement instead of necessity. Embroidery was an art form, thread spun so fine it gleamed like water. Lucia sits in her family's courtyard, needle flashing in the light. She's sewing a border of ivy leaves along a linen cloth. The pattern repeats endlessly, but she doesn't tire of it. The design reminds her of the vines that climb the garden wall, reaching toward the sun. She likes to imagine that her stitches do the same. Her tutor says that embroidery teaches discipline, but to Lucia, it feels like storytelling. Each leaf is a thought, each line a pause. She sews quietly, her mind wandering far beyond the courtyard. Even pottery carried stories. In workshops near the Aventine Hill, women painted designs onto cups and amphory scenes of weddings, dances, festivals. Some were intricate, others simple, but if you looked closely, you'd sometimes find something surprising. A woman's initials scratched into the clay's underside, hidden but permanent, an artist's quiet proof that she was here. The workday stretched long, but it wasn't without joy. Songs kept time, short melodies hummed under breath. You might hear them drifting from windows, from alleys, from open courtyards, the soft chorus of women and girls, keeping the city alive. As afternoon waned, tools were cleaned, benches swept, fabrics hung to dry. The sun caught the drying threads, making them shimmer like spun gold. A warm wind rolled through, stirring the smell of olive oil, dye, and clay. This was the scent of Rome's labor, not the marble monuments, but the small, enduring work of its people. In the baker's home, Livia sets her spindle aside. Her hands ache, but she smiles when her mother nods approval at the evenness of her thread. "You've learned the rhythm," her mother says. "Now the thread will remember it for you." And that's what their crafts were, memory made visible. Each mark, each thread, each shape in clay carried the rhythm of the maker's hands. The girls of Rome may not have written books or carved their names into triumphal arches, but they left something deeper, the texture of a world held together by their touch. Evening comes again, slow and soft. The sounds of work fade, replaced by the distant murmur of laughter and bells. The city exhales once more, its dust settling like glitter in the last light. Livia steps outside for a moment, brushing her hands on her tunic. The sky above glows red, and in the distance, music drifts faintly from a square. It's the sound of celebration, a festival night beginning. She smiles, because she knows tomorrow there will be rest, garlands and dance. And as the first torches are lit and the music rises, the girls of Rome, tired but proud, prepare for joy. For one day, work will pause, and laughter will take its place. But what did those festivals feel like? The lights, the garlands, the games, the rare moments when Roman girls could simply play. We'll drift there next. Comment where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. The work is done, and Rome begins to glow. The air feels lighter now, humming with anticipation. From every street corner comes the smell of roasting grain and honey cakes. The laughter of neighbors, the clatter of sandals rushing toward the square. It's festival day, a brief, golden pause in the endless rhythm of chores and trade. For one shining stretch of time, the rules loosen just enough for girls to laugh without being told to quiet down. If this brings you calm, breathe slowly. Imagine standing in the cool shade of a doorway, watching the street filled with color. Above, garlands of flowers hang between windows. Their petals, woven in haste, drop one by one into the dust below, and the scent of roses mixes with the sharp attempts of olive oil lamps. Musicians tune their pipes nearby, a few playful notes floating through the air like birds testing the wind. Livia holds her sister's hand as they step into the crowd. The noise is overwhelming at first. Drums, shouts, the creak of wooden carts carrying baskets of offerings. But beneath it all runs a soft undercurrent of joy. Girls wear ribbons in their hair today, their tunics brushed clean. Even the poorest have added a touch of brightness, a string of beads, a sprig of laurel tucked behind the ear. Today's celebration is for Flora, goddess of flowers, and everywhere she is honored, beauty follows. Vendors hand out petals by the handful. Children toss them in the air, and for a moment, the dusty Roman street turns into a field of floating color. The petals stick to tunics, to hair, to laughter itself. The city feels alive in a different way, not with power or order, but with softness. Festivals in Rome were many, each one an escape from the ordinary. There were solemn ones for the gods of hearth and war, and then there were the joyous ones, like this, where the rules of the everyday world bent a little. Girls who spent their days spinning or grinding grain could dance now, their bare feet tapping against stone. Mothers smiled at their daughters' freedom, even as they warned, "Stay close." Music rises, the shrill song of flutes, the deep pulse of drums. Someone starts a circle dance, and Livia joins in, shy at first. She takes the hand of another girl, a stranger with green ribbons in her hair. They spin until the world blurs into motion and laughter. When they stop, dizzy and breathless, the crowd cheers softly, and for once, no one scolds. Nearby, Lucia, the merchant's daughter, watches the festival from the shade of her family's stall. She's dressed in finer linen, her hair bound in a neat braid, but her eyes are the same, bright, curious, full of longing. Her father's customers bargain loudly over fabrics, but she watches the girls dancing and feels a pull, an ache of envy softened by admiration. Her nurse catches her gaze and smiles gently. "Go on," she says, pretending not to give permission. Lucia doesn't hesitate. She slips into the sunlight, and for the first time, no one stops her. Everywhere, the air shimmers with life. Boys chase each other through crowds, vendors call out blessings, and the temple bells ring, deep and rhythmic. Girls throw petals at the priests as they pass, giggling when the older men try to stay serious. The priests pretend to frown but can't help smiling too. Even the gods, it seems, allow laughter today. The games begin in the square. Simple contests, tossing stones into jars, balancing baskets on heads, races in the dust. Livia joins one, her skirt hitched high enough to run. She loses, of course, but the girl who wins shares her sweet fig prize without being asked. The sticky syrup clings to their fingers, and they lick it clean, laughing. It's the kind of laughter that stays, echoing through memory long after the petals are blown away. For a few hours, the city is transformed. The marble temples gleam, the alleys smell of spice and honey, and the usual tension of Roman life melts under the rhythm of celebration. No one speaks of chores or marriage or dowries. For these brief moments, everyone belongs to the same song. Later, as the sun dips low, the procession begins. Girls carrying small lamps, walking in slow, careful steps toward the temple steps. The flames flicker against their faces, turning every expression to gold. You can almost hear their breath, steady, reverent, alive. They sing softly, voices blending in harmony. The song isn't recorded anywhere, but it has lived for centuries in memory, a melody about renewal, light, and the turning of seasons. When they reach the temple, they lay down their lamps and scatter the last of the petals across the threshold. A priestess blesses them, her voice low and sure. Then, one by one, the lamps are extinguished, leaving only the scent of smoke and flowers. The girls bow their heads, and for a moment, the world holds still. As dusk settles, families gather again. Bread and cheese are shared on the steps, jugs of watered wine passed around. Livia's father plays a simple tune on a reed pipe, and even the neighbors hum along. The stars begin to appear, first one, then another, until the sky becomes a mosaic of light. For the girls, festivals meant memory, moments of joy that could be folded and kept for the quiet days ahead. Tomorrow would bring chores again, weaving and carrying, but tonight they were free. Even the smallest child understood that this freedom, rare as it was, mattered. It reminded them of something deeper than rules, that life could be gentle, that laughter itself was sacred. Lucia, sitting at the edge of the square, watches the last dancers fade into the night. Her feet ache, her ribbon is crooked, her hands smell faintly of honey and flowers. She closes her eyes and smiles. Remember this, she tells herself, for when the quiet days return, the lamps dim, the music softens. Somewhere, a temple bell marks the end of the festival. The petals on the ground curl inward, their color fading into shadow. But the warmth lingers, the way sunlight lingers behind closed eyes. As you listen now, imagine that warmth, the kind that comes not from fire or sun, but from shared joy. The kind that hums under your skin, steady and slow, like a heartbeat. The city will sleep soon. The laughter will fade into dreams, but the stories, the myths told in these festivals will remain, whispered from mother to daughter, shaping the next day's hopes. Because what were these celebrations without the goddesses behind them, without Diana, Minerva, Venus, and Vesta, figures who mirrored the girls themselves, each carrying light in her own way? But who were these goddesses to the girls of Rome, and what did their myths teach them about courage, kindness, and survival? We'll drift there next. Comment where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. The festivals have ended, their petals now swept into corners by the morning breeze. The laughter has quieted, and Rome returns to its measured hum. Yet the joy lingers like perfume in the air, faint but unforgettable. For the girls of the city, that feeling doesn't vanish with the petals. It transforms into something older, something told in whispers beside oil lamps, or beneath the soft echo of temple bells. This is where stories begin, not of emperors or battles, but of goddesses and heroines who shaped how every girl understood herself. If this brings you calm, take a deep, steady breath. Picture yourself sitting in a courtyard at dusk. The day is warm, but shadows stretch long. A small lamp flickers beside you, the flame trembling each time someone passes. In the corner, an older woman, maybe a grandmother, maybe a servant who's lived long enough to be both wise and weary, begins to speak. Her voice is low, deliberate, each word wrapped in rhythm. Listen, she says, the gods are always watching, but so are the goddesses. Girls lean closer, their hands still smell of bread and smoke. Their eyes, still bright from festival nights, grow wide with quiet wonder. The first story is of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. Her flame, they are told, is the one that never dies, the same that burns in every home. Keep it alive, the old woman murmurs, and your house will never fall. For girls like Livia, who spends her mornings cleaning lamps and feeding fires, this feels like both comfort and power. The act of tending, once invisible, now becomes sacred. Every time she adds oil to the flame, she feels closer to something eternal. Then comes Diana, the huntress, the goddess of independence. She walks through forests barefoot, bow in hand, her hounds beside her. She owes nothing to anyone, answers to no man. Lucia listens to this story with a quiet ache in her chest. She imagines Diana's shadow slipping through the trees, hair unbound, eyes sharp and calm. For a moment, Lucia feels the thrill of that freedom to move without permission, to be wild and unobserved. She doesn't say it aloud, but she carries the thought like a spark inside her dot. There are stories of Minerva too, goddess of wisdom and craft. She is said to have sprung from Jupiter's mind, fully formed, wearing armor and holding a spear. But the part that matters most to the girls isn't the armor, it's her patience. Minerva, the old woman says, was not born to destroy but to create. She teaches weaving, writing, and strategy, skills that require quiet strength. The girls listen and think of their own work, the hum of the spindle, the scrape of stylus on wax. She watches the ones who think before they act, the old woman says, and those who listen before they speak. For a moment, the girls imagine the goddess herself sitting among them, her hands folded, her gaze steady. The flame of the lamp flickers higher, and they feel, just for a heartbeat, that Minerva might indeed be listening. Then comes Venus, goddess of beauty and love, and the girls giggle quietly, though their mothers hush them. She isn't only about love, the old woman reminds them. She is about belonging. She is about the courage to be seen. Beauty, in her stories, is not vanity but presence, the glow of kindness, the warmth of laughter, the strength of care. The girls nod. They have seen that beauty before in their mothers, their aunts, the women who worked until their hands ache, yet still smile when the day ends. The stories twist and branch like vines, and each one holds a different light. There's Persephone, though she isn't Roman by birth, a borrowed tale from Greece, a girl who spends half the year in the world above and half in the underworld below. Even darkness has its seasons, the storyteller says, and every descent has a return. The girls hold their breath, understanding more than they can say. They know what it means to wait for spring, for safety, for morning. As the lamp burns lower, another tale unfolds, one that feels closer to life than legend. It's about a girl named Clolia, who once lived in Rome itself. Captured by enemies during a war, she escaped by swimming across the Tiber, leading other girls to safety. The soldiers called her brave. The Senate, amazed, had a statue made in her honor, the rare sight of a girl cast in bronze. She didn't fight with a sword, the old woman says softly, but she fought with courage. The girls look at one another. They know no one will build statues for them, but the story still plants something firm and glowing in their hearts, for the girls of Rome. These myths were more than stories. They were mirrors. In Vesta's flame, they saw duty. In Diana's bow, freedom. In Minerva's patience, intellect. In Venus's light, compassion. They memorized these figures, not as distant gods, but as reflections of their own quiet strengths. And as they grew older, they passed the stories on during weaving, while stirring pots, while brushing a child's hair. The myths became lullabies, lessons disguised as dreams. Be steady, they'd say. Be kind. Be wise. Be watchful. The goddesses never demanded perfection. They offered endurance. Imagine that now, the gentle glow of an oil lamp, the whisper of these names carried into the dark. A girl listening, half asleep, half dreaming. She doesn't remember the words exactly, only the feeling they leave, warmth, courage, and something like hope. Later, when she faces her own small battles, the unfairness of rules, the ache of work, the fear of walking alone, she remembers them. She remembers that even in the stories of men, there were women who held fire, who made choices, who stood their ground. The lamp burns low now. The storyteller's voice fades to a hush. The last word lingers in the air, carried by smoke and silence. The girls lie down on woven mats, their eyes heavy. Somewhere outside, a night breeze stirs the trees, and the moonlight catches the edge of a clay Venus on the shrine. As they drift to sleep, they imagine the goddesses watching not as rulers, but as companions, quiet presences in the dark, keeping the world just steady enough until morning. Because myths were never just stories, they were promises, and for every girl who listened, they whispered the same thing, that her voice, her care, her endurance were sacred, too. But what happens when those stories end, when a girl leaves the safety of home and steps into the wide, unpredictable world, when her own journey begins, past the river, past the gate, into the unknown? We'll drift there next. Comment where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. The stories of the goddesses linger long after the lamps have gone out. They move with the girls of Rome like invisible companions, whispers tucked into their hearts as they grow, as their world stretches beyond the courtyard walls. For many, the first step outside home feels like crossing a threshold into a wider universe, one filled with risk, wonder, and the weight of expectation. Travel in ancient Rome wasn't just a journey through distance, it was a passage of becoming. If this brings you calm, breathe slowly. Imagine the sound of sandals on stone, soft and deliberate, as dawn blushes over the rooftops. The air smells faintly of dew and olive wood. A girl, maybe Lucia, maybe someone you haven't met yet, stands at her doorway, the hem of her tunic brushing her ankles. Behind her, her mother adjusts her cloak, pulling it snug over her shoulders. "Walk carefully," she says, "and keep your eyes open." The advice is simple, but heavy with meaning. Rome stretches before her, a city of arches and smoke, of river mist and temple bells. She walks past familiar walls that suddenly seem strange when seen alone. The baker calls out, the blacksmith's hammer rings, the fountain splashes all the same sounds she's known forever. Yet today they feel different. Today they belong to her. For most Roman girls, travel was rare and precious. Some ventured only as far as the next neighborhood, or to the market by the river. Others journeyed to visit relatives in nearby towns, riding in wagons with baskets of bread and oil, or walking behind caravans that kicked up soft clouds of dust. The world beyond the city gates was vast vineyards, olive groves, distant hills, a living painting brushed with color and heat. Livia once dreamed of seeing the sea. She'd heard stories of it, the endless blue stretching beyond sight, the salt wind that tangled your hair, the sound of waves like breathing. One spring, her father took a delivery of bread to the port at Ostia and allowed her to ride along. She remembers the journey even years later, the creak of the cart, the smell of grain, the way the air grew cooler as the Tiber widened. When she saw the water at last, she fell silent. The sea shimmered like hammered silver, its horizon vanishing into the sky. "It looks alive," she whispered. Her father nodded. It is for a girl who lived her life inside narrow streets. That moment was a kind of awakening, the first realization that the world was larger, deeper, older than she had ever imagined. She cupped seawater in her hands, tasted the salt, and laughed. But not every journey was joyful. Travel carried its own fears. Roads were long and rough, inns often unsafe. Chaperones were expected for women and girls, and caution was constant. Still, they went to temples for offerings, to weddings, to funerals, to family gatherings in other towns. Each trip began with ritual, a prayer to Mercury for safe passage, a small loaf left at the household shrine, a whispered goodbye to the Lebris, the guardians of home. Imagine standing on a stone bridge at dawn. The air is cool and clean, and beneath you the river moves like glass. You can hear the trickle of water against the pylons, the faint rustle of reeds. A girl pauses before crossing, placing her hand on the railing as though it were an altar. "Protect me," she murmurs to the spirit of the river. Then she steps forward. The sound of her sandals against stone feels like a heartbeat echoing into the distance. Journeys shaped a girl's courage. Even walking alone to the next street required awareness, eyes open, head steady, posture composed. Beyond Rome's walls, there were quiet marvels, the smell of pine trees in the countryside, the hum of bees in the heat, the distant sound of shepherds calling their flocks. For city girls, it was like stepping into a poem they'd never known they were part of. Travel also meant thresholds, not just roads and bridges, but the invisible crossings between childhood and something more. The first time a girl delivered goods alone, the first time she went to a temple without her mother, the first time she saw another town and realized that her life, though small, touched something vast. Lucia remembers her first threshold clearly. She was 14, traveling with her aunt to Tiber. The hills were green, the road lined with cypress trees. Along the way, she saw women washing clothes in the river, children chasing dogs, old men sitting in shade, telling stories. Every face was new, yet familiar, a reflection of the same rhythm that beat through Rome. At a rest stop, she touched the stone milestone that marked the distance to the city. "Look," her aunt said, "every road leads home if you walk long enough." The thought comforted her then, and would again in years to come. At the temples of distant towns, girls brought offerings, garlands, candles, jars of oil. They touched the marble steps as they ascended, feeling the coolness seep into their palms. They whispered prayers, not just for family, but for themselves, quiet hopes that no one else would ever hear. "Let me be brave," one might say. "Let me be kind." And when they returned home, they carried pieces of those journeys with them. A pebble from the roadside, a pressed flower, a new song learned from a traveler. Even the dust on their sandals felt like proof that the world was larger than their doorstep. Sometimes, though, the most meaningful travel wasn't measured in miles, but in courage, crossing a threshold into a stranger's home, standing up to speak when silence was expected, daring to say no. Each act, small as it seemed, was its own journey, one that changed how a girl saw herself. At twilight, when the roads darkened and the lamps were lit along the walls, families would wait for travelers to return. You can picture it, a mother at the doorway, a lamp raised, her eyes scanning the street, the sound of approaching steps, the relief of recognition, the gentle scolding that hides pride. "You're late," she says, but her voice trembles with joy, and as the door closes, the world shrinks again to its familiar size. The road waits outside, quiet and infinite, holding a promise for tomorrow. Travel, for the girls of Rome, was both departure and return, an act of faith. Faith that the world could be kind, that the journey could teach, that home would still be there when they came back. The night deepens now, and the roads fade into silence. But even within the safety of their walls, another kind of journey continues, the emotional roads that lead through friendship, compassion, and small rebellions of the heart. Because sometimes, the bravest travels happen without leaving at all. But what did friendship look like in Rome? The secret notes, the laughter, the small kindnesses shared in a world that demanded silence. We'll drift there next. Comment where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. Evening returns, soft and amber, settling gently over Rome's rooftops. The noise of trade and travel fades to a murmur. Lamps flicker in doorways, one by one, until the city seems stitched together by small points of light. For the girls who live within it, this is the hour of quiet, when friendship, laughter, and secret kindnesses come alive in the hush between duties. Rome might have been ruled by emperors and men, but the pulse of its tenderness belonged to its women and girls. If this brings you calm, breathe deeply and let the air settle around you. Imagine the smell of olive oil and smoke, the faint sweetness of figs on the table, the sound of sandals whispering against stone floors. Somewhere in a modest apartment, a handful of girls sit together near a low lamp, their voices hushed but bright. Livia sits cross-legged, a length of thread coiled in her lap. Her younger sister dozes beside her, head resting against her knee. Across from her, their neighbor, Flavia, mends a torn hem. They talk in fragments about the festival, about the baker's son who dropped an entire basket of loaves, about the new mosaic being built near the forum. Their laughter rises, soft and low, like a secret they all protect. In a world that often demanded silence, these small conversations were acts of defiance, gentle rebellions against loneliness. Friendship was more than companionship. It was safety, a web spun quietly between girls who understood each other without needing to explain. By day, they worked apart in kitchens, workshops, courtyards, but in the quiet hours they gathered. Sometimes they shared food, sometimes news, sometimes nothing at all, just presence. One might bring a broken comb, another a loose thread of gossip, and both would leave feeling lighter. These were the invisible gatherings that history never recorded, but they are what kept the city's daughters whole. Friendship in Rome didn't need to be loud. It lived in small gestures, a shared loaf of bread, a jug of water passed without asking, a knowing glance when a task grew too heavy. Girls like Livia and Flavia learned to read each other's moods the way they read the cracks in the walls, subtly, silently, even across class divides. The language of friendship found ways to exist. Lucia, the merchant's daughter, wasn't supposed to linger in the servants' quarters, but she often did. There, she sat beside her family's maid, Sabina, who taught her songs from her own village. They sang them in whispers, their voices rising and falling with the rhythm of the spinning wheel. Lucia's mother pretended not to notice. Friendship, in such moments, blurred the edges of hierarchy. Letters, too, carried connection. On scraps of papyrus or wax tablets, girls wrote notes to friends who lived across the city, small, careful messages about nothing and everything. The figs are ripe now. One might write, the fountain water tastes sweeter this week. Simple words, but filled with the intimacy of shared observation. They sealed them with wax and pressed their initials, a small mark of ownership in a world that rarely allowed one. And in these exchanges, they learned the art of quiet resistance. When the rules of Rome pressed too hard, when girls were told not to speak out of turn, not to laugh too freely, not to question, they turned to each other. A friend was a mirror that reminded them of who they were beneath obedience. Together, they found ways to bend without breaking. There were unspoken codes. When one girl had no oil left for her lamp, another would light hers and set it by the shared wall, letting its glow spill through the cracks. When one had no bread, someone else would leave half a loaf on her doorstep at dawn. No thanks were spoken, no debts recorded. The act itself was the message. I see you. You were not alone. Sometimes, their rebellion took gentler forms, a shared story told in a forbidden hour, a whispered joke about a pompous neighbor, a moment of laughter at the wrong time in the marketplace. They weren't grand acts of defiance, but they were enough. Each one said, "We are still here. We still find joy." For girls like Lucia, those friendships became a quiet kind of courage. When her father arranged her future marriage, she spent her last free afternoon sitting by the fountain with Sabina. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Lucia traced circles in the water with her finger. "Do you think the gods ever wish they could trade places with us?" she asked. Sabina smiled faintly. "Only when they want to remember what it's like to feel." That night, Lucia tucked a piece of blue thread, Sabina's gift, into the hem of her tunic before leaving for her new home. It wasn't jewelry or wealth, but it was something stronger, proof that love and loyalty could exist even when the world tried to divide them. In the baker's quarter, Livia's circle of friends continued their small rituals. Every week, they gathered to repair worn sandals, to share dried fruit, to trade stories. Sometimes they sat in silence, listening to the rain tapping on the roof. Sometimes they laughed so loudly the neighbors knocked on the walls in mock complaint. Their friendship became their own kind of religion, ordinary, sacred, enduring. As they grew older, the girls' meetings changed. Some married, some moved, some disappeared into new households, but each carried something of the others, a habit of kindness, a shared song, a memory of being understood. The bonds didn't vanish. They stretched across time, invisible threads weaving through generations. If you listen now, if you walk through those same Roman ruins in the modern quiet, you might still feel it. In the worn grooves of the steps, in the faded mosaics, in the echoes of laughter that once bounced off the stone walls. The evidence of friendship doesn't survive in monuments. It lives in what it built. Resilience, tenderness, and a history kept alive through care. Rome's girl rules were strict, but within them, girls learned to make softness into strength. They shared what they had, spoke when they could, and found ways to keep joy alive even when the world demanded silence. And so, as the night deepens over their flickering lamps, their laughter becomes something timeless, proof that connection itself can outlast any empire. Tomorrow, the lamps will be lit again, and another generation will take their place. New girls, new hopes, same heartbeat. And when the city finally rests, those stories of friendship will drift forward, carried like embers on the wind. But what happens when the story finally quiets, when centuries pass and all that remains is memory? What echoes of their girlhood still linger in ours today? We'll drift there next. Comment where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. The lamps are almost out now. The night hums gently, and somewhere beyond the city walls, the faintest streak of grey appears, the first whisper of dawn. The world of ancient Rome fades slowly, like a fresco touched by time, but its echoes linger. The voices of its girls, soft, patient, enduring, still drift through the centuries, reminding us of something quietly eternal, that every ordinary life, no matter how small, carries its own kind of history. If this brings you peace, take a long breath and let your shoulders relax. Imagine that the ground beneath you holds memories like the soil of old Rome, layers upon layers of footsteps, laughter, whispered prayers. Each one belongs to a girl who once thought her life would be forgotten, yet whose existence still ripples through ours in invisible ways. We've walked with them through their mornings of cool stone and bread-scented air, through markets bright with voices, through festivals, faith, and friendship. And now, as the last light of their world fades, we pause, not to mourn, but to listen. Listen to the hum of their daily lives, the spinning of wool, the splash of water drawn from a well, the clink of coins in a small, knotted purse. These sounds once filled the air as naturally as birdsong. Each girl had her rhythm. Livia at her mother's hearth, Lucia in her father's courtyard, Flavia in the workshop, Sabina in song. None of them knew their names would vanish from stone. But history isn't only made by names, it's made by moments. You can almost picture them now. the girls of Rome at the edges of history's great stage, holding it together without applause. They were the quiet makers of meals, of cloth, of peace in their households. When the city's men marched or ruled or quarreled, the girls kept the world turning, thread by thread, and through them we see reflections of ourselves. Their lives may have been bounded by walls and rules, but the feelings that filled them, friendship, curiosity, pride, fear, love, remain the same. A Roman girl waking before dawn to help her mother light the hearth might have felt the same quiet dread we feel before a long day, the same pulse of hope that something beautiful might happen anyway. When she laughed with friends, it wasn't so different from the messages we send. The late-night talks, the shared moments of trust, the shapes of connection changed from lamps to screens, from letters on wax to words on glass, but the need behind them doesn't. We all seek to be understood, to belong, to know that our lives touch others, and even their silence, the restraint taught to Roman girls, the rule to speak less, obey more, carries lessons. It reminds us how precious our own voices are, how every freedom we have was once a whisper waiting to be heard. When a girl like Lucia dreamed of writing her own story, she did so knowing she couldn't, yet we can, and so her unspoken dream becomes a quiet invitation. Use the voice she see, O-U-L-D, and single quotes D, as the centuries fold between us. It's comforting to imagine that those old Roman girls would understand us more than we think. They knew about expectation, they knew about waiting, they knew about pretending to be smaller than they felt, and yet, in the corners of their world, they carved out joy, laughter shared between tasks, a secret prayer, a song hummed softly against the noise of the city. There's something profoundly familiar in that, because even now, under different skies, we still build our peace the same way, in the small, steady rituals of care. A morning cup of tea, a hand resting on a loved one's shoulder, the glow of a window at night when the world outside feels too large. These are our modern offerings to the same gods of endurance and hope. When we talk about ancient Rome, we often picture its emperors, its marble, its wars, but maybe the truer Rome is the quiet one, the Rome of kitchens and courtyards, of laughter echoing between clay walls, of girls carrying water and dreams at the same time. That Rome, though unseen, is the one that built everything that came after. Imagine the city now, empty of its crowds, bathed in morning light. The temples are dust, the statues broken, the mosaics faded, but the spirit remains. You can almost hear it in the wind that moves through the ruins, a faint whisper of voices that once sang by lamplight. Their world taught them that beauty was duty, that obedience was virtue, and yet they found ways to be more than what was expected. A Roman girl could create rebellion in the gentlest of acts, by learning, by caring, by surviving. That's the kind of strength that outlasts empires, and maybe that's what we're meant to remember as we drift into sleep. That the threads of girlhood, ancient or modern, are all woven into the same tapestry. The language changes, the clothing shifts, the streets take new shapes, but the heart doesn't. It still beats with the same quiet courage. So tonight, as you rest, imagine one of them sitting beside you, maybe Livia with her shy smile, or Lucia with ink on her fingers, or Flavia with dye-stained hands. Imagine her watching you write, or scroll, or dream. She would see something familiar in you, that same yearning to create, to connect, to be remembered, and maybe she would smile, realizing her story didn't truly end, it just changed form. It became yours. History, after all, is not a wall separating the past from the present. It's a bridge, and across that bridge walk all the unseen girls who built the world we now rest in. Every time we light a candle, write a line, laugh with a friend, or help someone feel less alone, we carry them forward. The city of Rome sleeps now in ruins, but his heartbeat lives on in us, in the small, enduring kindnesses that keep the world gentle. As you close your eyes, let that thought settle like dust on a sunlit floor. Let it remind you that your life, too, is part of this long, quiet story. Every breath, every kindness, every dream, another verse in the poem of endurance that began long before us. So rest now, traveler. The girls of Rome have shown us the way, not through glory or conquest, but through care, patience, and hope. And as the last lamp flickers out, know this: beauty changes, but the need to be seen never does. If this brought you calm, subscribe so we can share another journey together, and share this with someone who thinks they'd breeze through. Girlhood in the ancient world, just to show them how much heart it really took.com and where you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches.